what are we talking about? Are we talking about TV content that's distributed anywhere? And if I watch TV on this, is that TV, or are we talking about the TV set, the rectangle thing, as Stephen was saying backstage earlier, in the living room?
Well, I think there's two parts to the question of what we're talking about. There's what is a millennial, which we'll touch on in a minute, but defining what is TV. The TV industry would take a broader definition. I saw a presentation from Philippe Daumont of Viacom at Cambridge a couple of weeks ago, and he said, in a kind of a post-internet speech, he said, television used to worry about the internet putting us out of business. We no longer worry about that. He said, we used to worry about the viewing on new devices and new services taking away from TV time, but we now realize that most of the time people are watching television content on those devices, or at least professionally made television content has reached out and colonized most of those devices and services. So in terms of what is television, the TV industry takes a very broad definition. If you're watching professionally made entertainment content from the TV industry's providers, you're watching television, irrespective of where and how you're watching it and finding it. We're not limited in terms of distribution platform in our thinking. There is linear broadcast channels being distributed over IP to big tellies, small tellies, and mobile tellies. There's broadcast telly being distributed in the same way, and there's VOD, catch-up, and box set archive being distributed to main tellies, secondary tellies, third tellies, mobile tellies, small tellies, and phones. It's all telly.
I think Mimi has said she thinks it's the TV set.
No,
Honestly, I've got a definition that suits me. I think we should really ask what normal people think TV is. And Ofcom have done a big piece of research looking at basically the spectrum from what they call TV to what they call video. And it's absolutely fascinating. So there isn't a sort of hard line.
Yeah.
But certainly all the things that Nigel had talked about definitely are TV. Yeah. But if it comes to user-generated content viewed on a smartphone from YouTube, they'd probably call that video. But
yeah.
I think we should be led by consumers rather than what we would like to call it.
But I also think we'll have a really short discussion if we're going to say, if we're talking about desertion, there might be some desertion around a particular box in a particular place, in a particular part of the living room by a particular audience. But if we're defining television as content, then I think the millennials are probably the biggest consumers of content that have ever existed. So if we want to debate that, I'm not saying that we should.
Let's make it the TV set. I can fight on any platform.
We'll fight you on
if you want to fight, let's make it the TV set then.
This is why I asked back Tess.
But also sometimes the debate is framed actually to mean moving away from linear into VOD.
Yeah.
So, and it's various different ways to define a debate. I think Tess and I would fight on that one as well, probably.
I disagree. I think the reason that we're all here today to have this debate is because of all the big headlines that we've seen on Business Insider and people like Mary Meeker talking about the audiences moving away from TV and what that means for us as an industry who are mostly concerned with advertisers is that we need to sometimes rethink the way we do things. And you're right, there are two different parts within that, but the headline and the reason that we're all here for this debate is because millennials are now consuming often more. Millennials, just think of young people, or 16 to 34 adults and old money. I think that they're born between 1980 to 2000. There's some slightly different definitions floating around, but and there's even now two different segments of millennials. But if you think of sort of young adults, they are moving away from looking at the television screen in the living room or in other rooms as well, and they're moving towards digital devices, and they're watching video content, and they're also looking at a lot of other content, and that's really why we're here, I think. So I think that would be how we should frame the debate. Are they going to then come back to that television screen? I think would be then the question that would be interesting to debate.
I think it's a past and now and a future that we need to reflect on. The first thing to say in the debate is that the TV industry and what was previously just the linear broadcast part of the TV industry has always struggled with young adults. This is not a new thing. If you look back at the charts, and Thinkbox have produced some very good charts recently, looking at audiences in the 1970s. And actually, if you look at the amount of time spent watching linear TV as we would traditionally have defined it, the audiences between the age of 16 and 20 drop off a cliff because young people are in the pub having sex, meeting girls and boys and all that kind of stuff, they fall out in large numbers, although they still picked, their worth times during the week when they watched it. So this isn't a new question. It's something the TV industry has always known that if you're an advertiser seeking to advertise to young adults, they're very hard to reach, and you had to work very hard to go and find them. So looking at the past, this is nothing new. This debate, the TV industry has always had this.
And I also think that we should be really careful about measurement. So there are headlines that are obviously very misleading, because often what they're doing is looking at sort of top-line data of what Barb measures, which is the TV set in the home, not the TV set out of the home even, not even hotels or offices. TV set in the home, live and within 7 days. And so even using that definition of the TV, just live and within 7 days on the TV set, I think 20 years ago, 1624s watched 2.6 hours of TV. They now watch 2.32 hours of TV. So that's gone down 10%, the TV set in the home, 1 to 7 days. If you then look at TV sets out of home, and also, more importantly, beyond 7 days, which broadcasters are driving. It's not like this is happening to broadcasters. Broadcasters are the people putting in services, encouraging people to watch beyond 7 days. They're putting in box sets and on-demand viewing and catch-up TV on set-top boxes to watch it on the TV set. That's not currently counted by Barb. And those young adults are big users of those services.
I think the interesting thing is that 20 years ago, they weren't looking at any other screens. And the opportunity and the things that marketers need to consider and think about how they spend their marketing dollars is that now they're spending maybe 2.5, 3 hours or whatever on television. They're often also spending as much or greater amounts of time just on their mobile, and then on digital devices, perhaps as much again, depending on the actual audience and the country, but give or take. So that's
a false dichotomy, isn't it? They're not doing that
instead
instead of watching TV, they're doing that instead of reading the Evening Standard.
Exactly, so that's a big opportunity that's created for marketers. And marketers who might see a headline like Millennials, are they deserting TV, might also legitimately wonder, well, where might they reach these consumers and how might they reach these consumers? Because I think one thing that we would all certainly agree on is that video content is the most compelling ad format, whether delivered on television screeners or digital screens. It's the most compelling advertising content. So I think that, as I say, the headline to me would be consumers, especially young ones, are changing the way that they consume content and consume screen content. And the follow-up point to that would be that creates an opportunity and change within the market for marketers and advertisers.
But TV companies never go around saying that people shouldn't think about other forms of video. You're the only side that is permanently trying to tell people to spend less on TV. And that seems to me a very, very sterile argument.
Is this the Tess who said out there, so this shouldn't be adversarial?
Well, because it shouldn't be.
No.
It shouldn't be. We should be enjoying the rich variety of video that's out there.
I want to step in.
Yes, Tess, I won't be picky.
Okay, I want to step in because I think we'll end up having the wrong debate if we are just taking a very defensive position about television.
If we're taking a defensive position, what's the bloody motion?
The motion was deliberately
We're being asked to
provocative.
defend something. You're putting out an aggressive motion.
I haven't said a word yet,
on.
but now I'm going to.
We didn't pick the motion, and we were picked for the motion quite recently as well.
So I think if we take a defensive position around television, I think we're just going to go around in circles, and we could spend the next 45 minutes doing that. But I don't think that's really interesting. I mean, I don't think we should take too much comfort from the idea that because that the future will resemble the past. I don't think that will happen. And I think in 13 to 17-year-olds and 18 to 24-year-olds, which is an audience that we know very well, the habits are not predictable. The habits are not the same as even 13 to 17-year-olds don't do the same as 18 to 24-year-olds. They spend an enormous amount of time talking to each other about things that relate to the things that they're interested in. And this is a profound change, because 10 years ago, that wasn't really possible. No. It took the coalescence of having mobile phones, which are almost ubiquitous, manageable data packaging and costs that you could afford, to allow the rise of social media and social channels. And as I said this morning, I think we haven't really understood what the power of that actually means is. Social media is a sound of people speaking for themselves. They speak for themselves and they speak to other people who are like them. And it turns out that human beings like to do this a lot. The exact pattern of human behavior is now played out in a technological sphere, which is why they're doing those things across screens. You know, it's not a hostile or combative position against television, which I love, which has delivered some incredible entertainment and will do so for many years. But to argue that none of that is happening, I think, is the beginning of an argument that can't be won. Because, you know, and you
Who's
know, we
arguing
could...
that none of that's happening? They're quite the reverse. We haven't made any statement. We're trying to just give people facts in response to an assertion that millennials have deserted TV and they're not coming back, which is a sort of separate issue. We're delighted. We love social media. Television loves social media. We'd love you to go and get as much advertising revenue as you like. Our point is, why would you permanently, as a sector, generally, snipe away at television when it's the most effective medium there is and continues to grow across all platforms? So that's the sort of depressing thing. We should be combining together. We should be collaborating to get more money into video advertising of all sorts.
So there is a rationale there.
Sniping. They're just saying that there are different patterns of behaviour.
The long-term business case for Facebook and YouTube are dependent on taking money from TV, unfortunately. They have a vested interest in somehow getting the money off TV because their long-term business...
They've convinced themselves of that.
But
they should take it off all that shitty online advertising that doesn't work.
Their numbers don't stack up without it.
We don't make statements like that.
Well, I can make statements. There's stuff online that works, that's brilliant, and there's stuff online that doesn't work. And
I think
I
think that part of the problem here is that it has become very fashionable to put up statements like this.
But,
and unfortunately, the data doesn't support them.
Can I just clarify? Okay, this, and as I said to you both in the email when I said it to you, I said, I've chosen this. I want something that's a bit provocative. I said I don't necessarily believe this. I don't, you know. But I think it would be a fun topic to be. I could feel that I could enjoy being on either side. And here we are.
I think
that worked. The second thing, a millennial isn't a teenager in their bedroom, you know, who's wanking instead of watching TV. It's
both nowadays.
It's somebody who's
hardly restricted to millennials.
People.
Have you seen Game of Thrones?
Born in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, and generally speaking, the characteristic is that they've either grown up or were during their formative years at some point, the internet was around, and that they maybe picked up media consumption habits that differ to, you know.
But by that definition, I'm almost a millennial.
I am almost a millennial. I'm 3 years away. Yeah.
The audience that's of interest, the audience that is doing the most new, different things, the audience that we really need to try and understand, I think, are 13 to 17-year-olds. And the reason is because they're going to affect the world with their choices and they're going to affect the world with the things that they do and listen to. 13 to 17-year-olds are going to be first-time voters at the next election. They will inject themselves into the mainstream. Now, my view is that this cohort are not doing anything that even a near millennial such as myself really recognises. They spend hours and hours and hours watching Stampy and Squid. If Stampy and Squid put up a political candidate, you know, I reckon he'd be a runner in the next general election. They have an incredible amount of passion for the YouTubes.
What's your source? How many hours do they spend watching that? And what percentage of them? So there's a lot of sort of very broad and fudgy, woolly...
I don't think they are fudgy. I just want to ask,
I'm sure some of them do spend a lot of time, but it's often we get, my daughter does this or my son does this.
Yeah.
Well, we have 1.5 million of them.
Know the source, that's all.
We have 1.5
Simple
million
question.
of them. So, you know, I don't think that these are fudgy things. And I think that one of the reasons that we're having this, I think, slightly misguided debate is because if I were to ask you, Tess, what are 13 to 17-year-olds doing in television, maybe you would probably be able to inform us, and then we'd be able to have a debate on the back of that about how to bring them into long-form entertainment, which I think, that might be a valid thing to discuss.
Do you want facts?
I'd love some facts, yes.
You want facts?
Let me find
She's been tweeting these charts for 2 days, by the way, everyone. If you follow the NVF, these charts are available on Twitter.
The truth about that group of people is that video is their lingua franca. They've really, other than, say, Snapchat and sort of SMS, which is still quite big for them, text generally is a lot less important. They tend not to read print, whether it's, you know, a printed magazine or even online. They're much happier watching videos online, even on the Guardian website. So using video to get to this group of people is incredibly important. The single biggest thing they do online is actually emailing each other and watching clips. Listening to radio is bigger than watching online clips as opposed to long form. So I think, of course it's changing, and this group of people are fascinating, and they do things differently because there are new things available there. But saying that this is a completely new behaviour, talking to each other, young people went out and sat in the playground on the swings and talked to each other, or they were on the phone talking to each other. Get off the fucking phone when I was young.
It can be monetised, and that's what we're talking about. We're talking about screen time. And I'm sure, you know, human behaviour hasn't changed.
They don't watch any less long-form video.
I don't believe
They watch slightly on different screens.
I just don't believe that.
10% less within 7 days on a TV set.
I think there's a couple of things to think about here. First of all, we're, you know, certainly as an organisation and as a company, we're not bound by being limited to the UK. So when you start to look a little bit more globally, you'll see, for instance, in countries like China, which will become a very significant force for commerce, and where a lot of brands will win or lose, you know, potentially globally, driving their global revenues. They're already spending a lot more time on their mobile devices than they are on television. The advertising budgets on mobile will be larger on mobile than they are on TV today in China in just 3 years. Western Europe, you'll be glad to know, holds out for a lot longer than other geographies, including the US. And that, I think, is maybe largely...
How much of the mobile time is spent watching TV? Interesting.
So that was the other big point that I wanted to make, actually. There's a lot of kind of this focus on the idea that television or that a video ad should be delivered in-stream or as a pre-roll or in some kind of TV-like experience. I think that's the other big thing that's being shattered here. So once you're in front of a screen as a consumer, then you can have a great video experience delivered to you. And that's, as Nigel mentioned earlier, I think where Facebook is entering, you know, where it used to be the case that you had to rely on ITV to build your massive reach of putting a video in front of consumers, which clearly worked and has built brands for years and years and years and years. Now that can be done in other places. And Facebook has a larger reach, more time spent, etc., a very strong connection for those individuals. And it is part of now a mix, which is partly this pre-roll or in-stream view of the world versus the outstream. If you look at the actual available ad impressions, for instance, just digitally on mobile, about only 20% of them are delivered in-stream or as pre-roll, or just put another way, most of the time that we're using our mobile devices, we're not looking at video content. We're doing other things. So there's a couple of big things, as I say, the 20 years from where we were to where we are now that have changed. So people are now in front of screens a lot more. And technically, we can now deliver video ads, which we know are great, into more of those experiences. And that's something I think that marketers have to consider.
There's a couple of things I just wanted to flag up. One is wrong data, and the other one is misinterpretation of data. The thing about the people using their mobiles in China is very interesting and true. I worked on the launch of Star TV 20 years ago in China, and it was true then. The reason that the mobile is more important in the youth audiences in China is they have very, very small floor plates to their apartments and very large families. So grandma is normally in charge of the television at home watching telly, and we knew even 20 years ago that we had to somehow get telly onto the mobiles because the young people weren't able to get to the television set in most Chinese apartments. And it was a thing that it was our first learning on the ground 20 years ago in Chinese television. So it's a misinterpretation to think that that's a consumer behaviour change, that suddenly young people in China are watching telly on their phones because of phones. It's not. It's because grandma's watching fucking Korean soaps on the TV in a tiny little apartment where mum's cooking dinner for most of the time. So be careful about misinterpreting data points. The other thing I would say is that this as a debate is also massively misquoted. 6 weeks ago, Ofcom launched some data points on exactly this subject. The headline from the data research, from a very big piece of Ofcom research, was that 50% of viewing time for young people was still linear. And Association Press picked it up on a newswire and misinterpreted it as half of young people don't watch television anymore, and put it out on a newswire. And it was picked up by the FT, the Times, and the Telegraph. And we were chasing this bloody news story around London until we got to the editors who had actually put this thing out. And the Associated Press realised what they'd done and ended up having to put a stop. But by that point, all the papers had gone out with it printed. So this bloody headline hit every major newspaper in the UK saying half of young people don't watch telly anymore. And it kicked off this big debate. And actually the data point that Ofcom had published showed that actually in a market where people stand up at conferences and say young people don't watch telly anymore, actually the truth was 50% of their video time was based on live linear channel viewing. And that's in the hardest to reach segment. So we are a market where not only is wrong data being put out, but people are actually misinterpreting good data, which shows it to be completely false.
And more than 60% is sort of broadcasted content on other platforms, or playback, recorded and played back, or after 8 days. And a large chunk is Netflix and Amazon. That's a growing bit. That's really important to them. On all sorts of devices. So I think when you talk about different video ad formats, that's a really interesting area of discussion. And so when I said I really didn't want to fight, the reason I didn't want to fight is because the world is interesting and fascinating in the world of video. And the danger is that one bit of it thinks it should fight the other bit of it, rather than growing it together. But also that we just commoditize it and we think it's all the same thing, that a view is a view is a view. And in fact, they are very different. So, you know, an in-stream autoplay piece of video has got real interest and real value to an advertiser, but it is very different from sitting in a sort of relaxed state watching Downton Abbey and something comes up on the screen and it's a live ad. It's just a different thing. And so I think we do the whole of video a disservice by having these sort of silly fights, really, and not actually exploring the incredible difference and variety that there is in video, however it's delivered.
Can I ask from an advisory point of view, I'd be interested to know what you think that television channels, the likes ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5, how should they deal with the emergent threat to their business model of massive platforms like Facebook, like Apple, who want to be in long-form video, who have very engaged audiences that they can reach, and who can fund by a factor of 10, if not 50, what ITV has done very successfully for 60 years, which is put on a fabulous show for 50 minutes at 9 o'clock on a Sunday night. Because we have seen the first wave of breaking the television model through Netflix and through Amazon, through not the television model, the television channel model. So if I were Adam Crozier, I'd be thinking, you know what, now I'm in New York and there's Godzilla and the Smog Monster and I'm in that market. I'm curious to know, from an advisory point of view, how do you think that they can respond to protect what they've done incredibly successfully for so many years?
Well, I think there's a number of things they're doing already. If you look at ITV, it's focusing further left in the value chain. So it's buying up production. It recognises actually that there is great value in owning production sequences further back in the value chain. So it's buying production sector companies and adding them into channels. We must be careful not to assume that the ITV channel model is dead because of the arrival of Netflix. Now, I would point out today's the day that Amazon announced that they have written off Yahoo has written off £50 million of failed attempts at funding production company businesses and funding programs. So, you know, it's a complicated business making content. You just don't wander into it. And Netflix have had as many failures as they've had hits PRing about it. So, and ITV are very good at it. But what ITV are starting to realise is that owning content all the way back is the way you monetize it. So you create content, you run it on your own channels, and you run it onto other platforms, and you sell it on to other people to distribute. So they are moving slightly backwards in the value chain to protect it. But I would point you to a piece of BBC research that went out at the end of last year, which was funded by the Future Media team at the BBC, who run iPlayer, and set out to show that people no longer value linear channels, no longer value channel brands, and as a result, no longer value the EPG on television. And it found completely the opposite. And it was so contentious in the BBC that the lady who ran the piece of research ended up getting bumped out of the BBC and went to Kantar. But it's a brilliant piece of research, because what it showed was that consumers understand the value of channel brands, that they understand linear channels. They are, in a way, the least worst option for having someone else make program choices and schedule choices for you through the day, and that we should have to be very careful not to map our own lifestyles. You know, this group here in this room is not in any way normal. We are not in any way reflective of the national audience. There are people all around the country who frame their family life around TV schedules. And TV, in a very nice and friendly way, forms part of the natural fabric of their family life. They sit down and watch dinner after Emmerdale, and they'll stay and watch Corrie together as a group. And you see family viewing of TV in groups on linear channels is something which is used to bind families together all around the world. And it's an audience behavior and an audience requirement which doesn't map onto anything coming out of Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley understands users. It understands optimizing behavior. It understands all those things which are completely opposite to the main drivers to what make a linear TV channel successful.
Just on that point, I mean, I think one of the perceptions is that, you know, the video world is obsessed, and to be honest, most of it is, with everything being on demand, everything being snackable or you know. But one of the most interesting companies for me in video are a company called Twitch. We had them speak at New York. They might be here they're in the room now, but they were certainly coming. And they've been so if you're not familiar with Twitch, it's you're basically watching somebody else play video games, and then people are chatting at the side, which just sounds stupid. And I play games. I get gaming. I get kids liking games. And after the PR guy said, listen, just the only way you can get it is go on there and look at it. And went on, logged on, and it was just, I realized I sort of got what he meant straight away, because it was unlike any media experience I've had anywhere else. And I haven't been back too often since. But if I was 15 or younger, I would have loved it. So you had the feeling of hanging out. So you're watching this guy streaming, playing games. All the other people were chatting at the side. They were chatting to each other. The guy would respond to questions. The guy was actually, he'd no arms or legs and was sort of leading us to play the games. They were out there, and they were asking kids asking very blunt questions like, why do you have no arms? And he'd just go, oh, you know, because of this. And you know, thousands watching it. Their daily, the average usage rate per day is 104 minutes per user. Linear live stream every day. And these are you know, vast majority, you know, what people first think of millennials, these teenagers who supposedly, I think this Twitch kind of fall in between what both of you were saying, where, you know, there's linear behaviors.
We have Twitch on in the house all the time.
A 20-year-old boy.
Yeah, and what you have to remember is Twitch is radio for gamers. Yeah, it's not a threat or replacement to TV. The guys put it on an iPad, and they play Xbox whilst watching. It's like radio background stuff. It's context. It's interesting, but it's user-generated content on radio for gamers, and it sits there on the screen. And then whenever something decent's on TV, they turn off Xbox, turn off Twitch, and come and sit and watch TV with
This is the trap we mustn't fall into, of assuming any new video format, and there will be some new formats like Twitch, is always a substitute for what we recognise as what Mimi wants us to call TV. That people still love Hollyoaks and Game of Thrones, and, you know, with Great British Bake Off, for God's sake. You know, teenagers are obsessed with they still want that stuff. Of course they like other stuff. They love gaming, you know, and don't see them as substitutes for each other. In either advertising or...
I think it's something the TV industry could do extremely well, but don't. I think that's the type of model where they could be providing this quite easily, but just don't.
I don't get it. It's hard to accept an argument where you're saying that, and I'm not necessarily saying, I'm just saying, I'm critiquing what you're saying, that other things that happen at the same time are in some way not competitive, because history just doesn't show us that.
No, it's competitive perhaps with their Xbox, I'd say. Gaming is probably the single biggest part of teenagers' lives. So Twitch fills that, it ticks that box rather than going and sitting down with their mum and dad and watching Pointless or whatever they do with their tea. I just think we just need to understand human beings better and not permanently get alerted to, oh my God, it's all video, oh, it's video, so it's a competitive to TV. When Sky started, why weren't there all the headlines saying, this is the end of, it's the death of TV, it's the death of TV. Sky, there's this new thing called Sky, and it's a satellite dish. And that's
I
different.
think because
We
what
did it
people did
because
for
we
the
were
first
we were
20
somehow more
years is
grown up.
say,
Whereas now
this'll
when
never
people want to
catch
get in the
on.
TV market,
Nobody
whether it's
will do-
Facebook or Apple, or we suddenly say, oh, that's the death of TV. No,
I think
that's TV being so wonderful, other people want to be part of it.
I think
Why not?
Twitch is not actually much different to watching sport being played or watching a game of chess being played or watching some other competition.
Yeah.
I think what's different about Twitch and what's different about YouTube is that actually the production or the producer is using a platform to self-publish. And that, I think, is an interesting change in the industry. The other thing I think is interesting is this creation of an available ad slot that to some extent is complementary to, competitive with, or an alternative to the classic kind of television ad slot. And so I think that's really what's interesting about this. And as I've mentioned earlier, I think outstream, where like in Facebook feed, now you'll start to see ads put into the stream, is also complementary to, or an alternative to, competitive to the TV ad slot. And so what's happening is the content producers and distributors are changing, and video content doesn't have to just sit within stream, it can sit outside of that. And that creates a lot of opportunity and a lot of change and disruption that marketers owe it to themselves to understand and effectively use. And I don't think that change is happening pretty fast, actually.
Did advertisers ever only use
that's what's
TV?
interesting.
No advertiser has ever only used TV. So if you're saying lots of new video advertising opportunities that complement your TV campaign, yes, absolutely, of course.
I think, the good news is
But
that
is it an alternative?
video
Very stupid to make it an alternative.
Video as a format will grow massively, and different types of video
Great,
format.
let's do that together.
Long form.
Let's join hands and dance off the stage saying we are going to make video advertising bigger, rather than trying to
we're
say this is a fixed pot and we want to take all of TV's money. That's just sad.
To be fair, that is absolutely our view. And as the chair of the MMA, actually, I invited you to speak at one of my events.
You
and
did, and I was very happy to.
Yeah, and
I
I'd
was
be very happy to come and speak at one of yours as well.
Right. Okay. Well, we
don't forget.
We do research with all sorts of other media owners. We love.
We've
TV
been placed
and
into this debate by Vincent.
Yes.
Can't blame me.
But there are, but it's right to say, as Mimi says, it's right to say that there are now a lot of other opportunities and different producers and distributors and different opportunities for advertisers, and that will create a lot of change, no doubt. And it is clear to anyone, I think, that anyone who has kids
stop
or has
buying
been,
banners and buy online video.
Sure, but it's also clear, I think, to any of us as well, that younger people especially, but to some extent all people, are looking at linear TV less in its kind of on the television box. And
only 10% less.
10% less over 20 years within 7 days in home.
Again, depends on which markets you're looking at, whereas we talked about earlier, and some other markets are very, very different. And that's a trend, and that's what's got all the headlines, and that's because the TV industry is so big, and not just the TV industry, the companies it props up. People like Unilever and Procter & Gamble have built huge businesses on the back of the great medium that you've helped create and grow. And that's why it's so attention-grabbing, because we're not just talking about a $200 billion brand TV market, we're talking about the trillions of dollars of consumer packaged goods and other products that are very strongly influenced.
And therefore it's really important for people who are not in TV to be very cautious and responsible when they talk about it, the viewing changing, because you are talking about a very important industry within marketing and for brands. So by all means criticise TV or talk about TV with facts. If TV viewing is going down overall, of course you must talk about it. But let's understand it better, because why damage something that is still the most effective pound for pound, profit back advertising opportunity there is. And that's why last week's Google thing, take 24% of your TV money out and put it onto YouTube, is frankly, I think, irresponsible based on very faulty data. So that's all we ask. We don't mind any other platform growing. It's just that when you talk about TV, be really careful.
If it was as resilient as you're saying, then none of that narrative would actually affect the reality.
No, it is not. TV revenue's up 7% this year.
I'm curious to...
It's just tedious having to
Advertisers
talk about
read data. most people who come on these conferences guff on and they'll offer opinion. Advertisers spending millions and millions of pounds look at the data, and therefore advertising revenue on TV is up 7%.
Actually, here I have to confess, as part of the Mobile Marketing Association, to be slightly partisan. We took on a large piece of research in the US with Coca-Cola, AT&T, MasterCard, to understand exactly down to sales what the effectiveness was of various advertising formats, and pound for pound against television, traditional television budgets, which had been used at high frequency, to be fair. So we've never said remove all of that TV budget. We found that it was 4 times more effective, and that was signed off by Walmart and Coca-Cola and these other large brands. So I think that is at the heart of some of the debate, that actually TV advertising, which has created and supported huge industries, to some extent now is not the only answer. It's a very good answer for the bulk of what's happening, but there are other great complements to that. And so pound for pound, we would disagree with the most effective, most profitable.
Well, this has been done by Ubiquity, a completely impartial, the largest auditing company in the UK. So
ours was done by Coca-Cola and Walmart and AT&T, and happy to share the research with you, or
that would be fun.
maybe at one of your events.
So, I mean, part of the kind of much disputed motion is that they're not coming back. So it's forward-looking. So it's not just about. So where I was coming from on that is, and again, I suppose part of this is dangerously inspired by my own behaviour, where I've always everything in my house is IP delivered, and it's not because I write about the industry. It's just what I did naturally. Wasn't that interested in linear TV, and gradually but over time, and I remember Nigel saying this at conferences, a guy, he's full of shit, but then actually I'm starting to realise, I went, much as it...
There's good shit.
Yeah. Maybe Nigel said something sensible every once in a while, and maybe he was right even about me, where I'm slowly accumulating subscriptions to different on-demand services, and I'm kind of going like, it'd just be easier if this was one pay TV, but oh no. Yeah.
we hear this a lot in research. People tell us, no, I don't pay for TV. Obviously, I've got Netflix and I've got Amazon, and I use it on my UView box, which I pay a broadband sub for every month. But I don't pay for TV. And you're like, really? That's about £50 a month's worth of not paying for TV. Yeah, so, again, there's truth and there's facts. And we have to be careful of it. But the core point about whether they're coming back, Neil Mortensen, who for a while was head of research at Thinkbox and is now at ITV, does a very interesting piece looking at cohort behaviour. So he's broken up the TV audience into age groups, and he's compared current behaviour to 60s and 70s and previous behaviour. And actually what he showed, to be fair, was that people are coming back to TV, but our behaviour has all shifted right a bit along the chart. So effectively we are all behaving younger for longer. So in the
young people are living at home for longer because of the price of property.
And it's a number of things,
That dip that happens, that cohort, you come back because you get old, you have a job, it's sad, you die, and you have kids, and you come home and you want to watch linear TV. But we're staying on other devices because we're staying with our mum and dad longer. And but people absolutely come back.
And it's directly correlated to the
TV set.
To the average age that we get married, the average age we have our first children, the average age we get our first mortgage. Those things are very highly correlated to the average age we come back to linear TV.
It's still the screen that actually even teenagers prefer if they can get it. As soon as mum and dad go out at night, they come down from their room, stop watching on their tablet, and they start watching on the TV.
You see, I don't know, my kids aren't teenagers, and again, we want to resist this kind of, oh, my kid does this or whatever, but I remember growing up in the 70s and 80s and rushing down in the morning early to go and put on the telly, and I remember coming home from school and rushing to go and put on the telly, and I now see my kids sat in front of 2 quite large screens in our house where I've paid for all the services from Sky, and there's a whole pile of DVDs and everything else, and they'll sit, 2 or 3 of them gathered around a mobile device, because it is different. It gives them something that feels more personal to them, and they can choose what they want to access via it, and they choose not to put it onto that big screen, and it's a different experience. I think that's something that advertisers should also think about, and I think that's something that content creators should think about. And are they coming back? I don't think they'll come back in the same way that we were there. I'm really surprised by watching the behaviours of them. I think that it's, when they first developed the The remote control is much talked about, but people said, oh, well, why would anyone want that? My telly's only there, and my phone's in my pocket, and the way that my experience is different, and small changes in consumer experience change people. My parents will never watch any video content on the tablets and phones that they've now bought, and those young kids, when they grow up, will have a different life to us. I really believe that. So I'm sure that you'll find some different points and stats, and I can find some from different people. I think that TV has a future, as in you've defined it, that television producers have. ITV's share price continues to grow. Sky does great as well. But it is clear that consumers are going to be consuming things on different screens. And that the television in the living room has a very different place in their life than
So
it
you
did.
know what would be really interesting is if in some way the television industry created the kind of content, like a Corrie app, for example. Most of viewing on a mobile phone is via an app. If I was a super fan of a program, I'd love to see that as an app.
There are. I think the ITV have got a great service on YouTube full of clips and different. There's an ITV app that I think broadcasters have done pretty well, actually, embracing new technologies and reformatting their content in different ways and taking it to people in different ways.
I think.
Can I just on this? I mean,
Channel 4 could do one. They could call it All 4, couldn't they? It could have linear in it. It could have
amazing,
it could have on demand in it.
It could have social
It could have shorts in it.
Yeah.
I'll ring
tell
John
them about
Howard.
that idea.
Yeah.
Isn't there something though that in the in the way kids use YouTube? My 8-year-old nephew, and again, sorry, everyone's talking about their kids and nephews. But he has his own little YouTube channel where he makes these.
It's great.
Pretty terrible videos. But kids love them. He makes them about Minecraft. He's got his voice in there, so I built this and built this. I looked at one the other day. It had 14 views and 5 comments.
But how
5
brilliant.
comments. I mean,
How
that
brilliant
race,
that he can
that
do
must be one of the highest. So obviously, is that really something that, ITV can replicate without being the vicar of the disco and showing up, hi kids, here we are.
They shouldn't.
Turner is brilliant at sort of taking kids from a linear broadcast channel to taking them to all sorts of online destinations or apps and harnessing that creativity. I often say that TV is the elite athlete of video, if you like, in the way that we all want to watch the World Cup or we want to see the top teams, but we also want to go and see our daughter play netball on a Sunday. They're not alternatives for each other. And one day maybe somebody's daughter is going to end up in an Olympic netball team, and in the same way that somebody on YouTube will create something fabulous and they'll be discovered by some broadcaster and they'll be made massively famous, or they don't even need to do that. So it's just more different forms of video, all contributing to a very rich video life. Let's not try and make them fight each other.
I'd say that they were all elite athletes, just giving they're just running
But
in
they're
different
not.
events.
They're really not. But seriously, only your niece's family want to watch the 14 views.
No,
and
sorry,
to them,
I
it's better
was-
than any other content
Well, it's friends.
on the planet.
It's random kids.
So for a few people, that is the best content ever. Because it's their child doing
But again, this
something.
is
But you're not going to get lots
kids
I'm
watching
muddling,
each
sorry,
other's
whether or
views.
not we're talking
Yeah,
about TV.
whatever.
None of the views were from family members. They were all other kids. Lego Man 21,
when I was
Amy.
when I was a kid, I saved up all my parents' Green Shield stamps, bought a Super 8 movie camera, used to make these little movies, edit them, send them off to Hemel Hempstead for 3 weeks to get them processed, get them back, and then inflict them on my family with a projector. All that YouTube has done is cut out about 5 stages in about 3 weeks, and it's the same thing, which
It's
is brilliant.
fabulous.
I absolutely love it. But it's still your
Except
little
it
cousin is
also can bring a
inflicting her
global
videos.
audience, which shifts the dynamics.
It's what, sorry?
It brings a global audience, potentially, and that shifts the
but
dynamics.
those 14 people could be all over Ireland, let alone just from,
It's in the UK, actually.
Yeah. You know what I mean? Just because YouTube can hit global audiences, it doesn't mean that 500,000 people in Botswana are suddenly watching Vinny's daughter or cousin
I don't have a daughter.
movies.
Spreading rumours.
Just because, you know what I mean? It's a different thing. All that the internet done there is done what the internet does best.
I'd have to agree. I'd have to agree as well. I'd have thought any decent 30-minute TV, linear TV, probably gets more than 5 comments in the average living room. Unless they're literally...
I think Mimi's point about the global aspect is actually really, really interesting, because I think if you looked... People say to me, oh, you're not worried about anything about TV. And I say, yes, I really am, but not the things that you think I should be worried about. I'm not at all worried about people wanting to watch that stuff. But in fact, the windows that TV is generally operated in increasingly make no sense. And I think broadcasters are trying to have global windows so that you see Game of Thrones everywhere in the world at the same time, because otherwise we just get to piracy. So global brands are, which is why I suppose Google and Facebook have got a seeming head start. What they haven't got is content. But how quickly can the BBC have a global brand? How quickly can all the UK broadcasters? Pretty damn fast. And that's content that everybody around the world wants to see.
Yeah, we need more
They just
UK
need
and
to do
Irish,
it.
more UK and Irish programming punching up onto the international level.
Yeah.
It can't just be Downton Abbey and the
It's
others.
rights,
Yeah.
all sorts of issues.
So that's a thing to worry about. Are we producing enough UK and Irish programming which is good enough to compete at Game of Thrones level on the top level? So that's a thing to worry about. So which is the top end of the market. We need to be doing more and more of that, making sure that Adam Crowe's investment at the left-hand end of the value chain is ending up with British and Irish-owned companies that are producing programs that are in 30 countries, not 3 countries. And so that's a legitimate thing for the TV industry to be going out about. We want to make sure that the TV platforms we're playing with are fully converged. It's madness for the minute that I can't get short-form content in a Skybox, and I've got, that's the biggest, most important box in UK and Irish TV markets. So we need further convergence of technology. Actually, the TV industry will do that by bringing the best of the web into the controlled TV boxes, which are trusted and safe. Let's not forget that one of TV's roles in life is to mediate this scary world for families. And so, we got that's another thing we worry about, how to converge properly with the tech. So there's lots of things to worry about. Losing Millennials isn't one.
We're more or less out of time. I was listening to final comments. We'll go back. We'll do one final vote.